Ladies and gentlemen, you ever wonder what happens in a man's mind when the calls stop, when the messages don't light up his screen anymore? It's not just silence, it's an earthquake beneath the surface of his identity, and most people have no idea how deep that shift can go. At first, he might brush it off, maybe even chuckle, she must be busy. But as hours stretch into days, something primal kicks in. Doubt, confusion, ego, they wrestle for control, and what started as distance becomes a mirror, forcing him to confront what he's been avoiding all along. This isn't just about relationships, it's about what happens when validation disappears, when attention is withdrawn, when the comfort zone is shattered. Why does losing your presence hit harder than any argument? Why does silence echo louder than words? That's what we're diving into, and trust me, by the end of this, you won't just understand his reaction, you'll learn how it exposes a truth most men are terrified to face. Ready for that? Or should we stop here and leave him wondering? Silence has a language of its own. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't beg for attention, yet it shakes a man's inner world more violently than any confrontation. When you stop texting and calling a man, you're not just going quiet, you're introducing him to something he rarely faces head-on, his own insecurities. At first, it may seem like he doesn't care. He'll act unbothered. He might even post on social media, laugh with friends, or immerse himself in distractions. But beneath the surface, a storm is building because the silence you've given him doesn't just leave a space, it forces him to fill that space with thoughts, with doubts, with questions he's never had to answer. Most men are conditioned to believe they should always be in control. Control over their emotions, control over their image, control over how much power they hold in relationships. But when you withdraw your attention, that illusion of control starts to crumble. He starts wondering why. He replays your last conversations, analyzing every word. Did he say something wrong? Did he miss a sign? Is someone else occupying your time now? The silence becomes louder than anything you've ever said, because now he's left alone to interpret a narrative without your input. And the mind, when left unchecked, is rarely a kind storyteller. This is when insecurity creeps in, not in dramatic explosions, but in quiet, invasive thoughts. It's that split second of checking his phone and feeling a pang of disappointment when there's no message from you. It's the sudden rush of adrenaline when he hears a notification only to realize it's not you. It's the internal tug of war between pride and panic, between wanting to reach out and fearing rejection. Because when a man is used to your constant communication, your silence becomes a mirror, and not every man is ready to face the reflection. Insecurity doesn't always look like weakness. Sometimes it looks like arrogance. Sometimes it sounds like indifference. He might pretend he doesn't notice your absence, might act like he's better off without the distraction. But if he really valued your presence, your silence is cutting through him like a knife. Because now, instead of reacting to your words, he's reacting to your absence. And absence has a strange power. It invites imagination, and imagination can be far more terrifying than reality. He might try to rationalize your silence. Maybe you're playing games. Maybe you're trying to get a reaction. Maybe you're just tired of always being the one to initiate. But deep down, there's a much more uncomfortable thought. Maybe you're done. Maybe you've outgrown the connection. And that thought, that terrifying maybe, awakens a part of him he thought he had under control. The part that craves validation. The part that wants to feel wanted. The part that can't stand being forgotten. What most people don't realize is that communication, even when it's simple or mundane, creates emotional safety. A good morning text. A call after a long day. A quick message saying, "I saw this and thought of you." Those tiny, consistent actions build a sense of belonging. When they stop, it's like pulling the rug out from under someone. He doesn't know where he stands anymore. And instead of confronting his vulnerability, he might mask it. He might pretend he's unfazed, go radio silent himself, or try to distract himself with temporary attention from others. But all of that is noise trying to drown out the sudden emptiness your silence has left behind. There's also a timing element. The longer your silence stretches, the more layers it pulls back. In the beginning, it might just sting his ego. He's used to the attention and now it's gone. But with time, it goes deeper. He starts to question not just you, but himself. Why did he take you for granted? Why didn't he respond with more intention? Why didn't he notice the shift sooner? These questions don't come all at once, but they linger. They grow heavier with every unanswered day. And the worst part? He can't ask them out loud. He has to sit with them, alone. You've created space, and space is powerful. Space forces growth or exposes weakness. It pushes people to evolve or reveals the limits of their emotional maturity. Not every man is equipped to handle silence because silence doesn't flatter. It doesn't comfort. It confronts, and the more he tries to ignore it, the louder it gets. The louder it gets, the more he's forced to look inward. And the more he looks inward, the more those hidden insecurities, long buried under bravado and routine, begin to surface. When the messages stop and the calls no longer come through, something inside a man begins to shift. At first, he may brush it off. He might even convince himself that he's unbothered. But make no mistake, his ego is anything but silent. It wakes up like a sleeping beast, jolted by a sudden sense of unfamiliar vulnerability. His mind starts spinning, not with clarity, but with defense. The ego, trained to protect and dominate, begins its frantic scramble to regain control. Because for many men, control is not just about power over others, it's about avoiding the discomfort of not being chosen, not being needed, not being at the center. The ego doesn't care about emotional truth. It cares about status. It wants to win. And in a moment where silence has entered the dynamic, the ego interprets it as defeat. It sees your absence as a challenge, a threat to the narrative it has worked hard to construct, that he is desirable, important, irreplaceable. So when that illusion is punctured, when the steady stream of attention disappears, his ego goes into survival mode. This is not conscious most of the time. He may not even realize what's happening. All he knows is that something feels off, something is slipping, and he needs to get it back. In this scramble, he might begin acting out. He may start posting more on social media, especially in ways that suggest he's doing fine, thriving even. Not because he's genuinely joyful, but because the ego wants to be seen. It wants a reaction. It wants to control the story. If he can't get your messages, maybe he can get your attention some other way. Maybe you'll see him with someone else. Maybe you'll notice he's suddenly doing things he never did before. And maybe you'll miss him. That's what the ego craves, the upper hand, the reassurance that he's still desired, still powerful, still in control. He may even reach out not with vulnerability, but with calculated detachment, a vague message, a reaction to your story, something just enough to make you think of him. But if you respond warmly, he might pull back again. That's the ego playing games, dancing on the edge of connection while refusing to surrender. It's not seeking reconnection through honesty, it's seeking to dominate the emotional terrain. The irony is, this doesn't always make him feel better. In fact, it often deepens his internal conflict. He's chasing control, but losing genuine connection in the process. Yet he keeps going because the ego doesn't give up ground easily. Sometimes the scramble isn't visible at all. It's internal. He might withdraw, go cold, become distant, not just with you, but with others too. He'll tell himself stories to preserve pride, that you weren't worth it, that he's better off, that nothing's wrong. But underneath those stories is a very different emotion, confusion, maybe even fear. Why did your silence affect him this much? Why does he feel unsettled when he's supposed to feel indifferent? The ego will try to patch those cracks with arrogance, with distraction, with false certainty. But the more effort he puts into regaining control externally, the more the internal chaos grows. This is where the real war begins. The ego wants to move on quickly, to replace, to retaliate, but the heart lags behind. While the ego fights to appear unaffected, the truth whispers behind closed doors. It's not about you anymore, it's about him. His identity, his sense of worth, his need to always feel like the one who gets to choose, not the one left in silence. And now that he's not in control, now that someone else holds the power of response, he feels exposed, vulnerable. That's the word no man wants to admit to. Vulnerability terrifies the ego because it feels like weakness. So the scramble intensifies, the distractions multiply, the self-talk grows louder. In this frantic dance to reclaim control, he may sabotage himself, pushing you away further in an attempt to feel strong, ignoring the urge to speak with honesty because honesty feels like surrender. He might even convince himself he never cared. But deep down, the truth stays rooted, waiting for the noise to die down. And until he confronts it, until he chooses growth over pride, his ego will keep spinning the wheel, desperate to fix a narrative that's already slipping through his hands. When communication stops and the silence stretches long enough, a critical emotional fork appears in front of a man. He either begins to detach emotionally, building walls to protect himself from further vulnerability, or he falls deeper into obsession, unable to let go of the connection that once fed his sense of worth. What path he takes often depends on the foundation of his emotional intelligence, the level of security he carries within himself, and the role you played in his life. But make no mistake, your absence doesn't go unnoticed. It becomes the catalyst that sends him inward, forcing him to choose between emotional numbness or emotional fixation. For some men, detachment is a defense mechanism. It's easier to disconnect than to face the discomfort of emotional uncertainty. He might tell himself he's better off without you, that it's pointless to dwell on someone who's no longer reaching out. He might bury himself in work, hobbies, or meaningless distractions just to feel like he's moved on. But this detachment isn't always real healing, it's self-protection. He doesn't want to be vulnerable again, especially not after feeling powerless when you stopped communicating. So he builds distance, not just from you, but from the version of himself that felt exposed by your silence. And in doing so, he loses a part of his emotional capacity, trading depth for security. The emotional detachment may even show up as apathy. He stops caring, or at least tells himself he does. He avoids conversations about you, avoids mutual friends, avoids anything that might reopen a wound he hasn't actually healed. He convinces himself that caring less is a sign of strength, that walking away from emotional complexity is a badge of resilience. But beneath that cold surface, there's often a lingering sense of unresolved tension, a quiet knowledge that what's been buried hasn't truly been dealt with. He may act indifferent, but deep inside, detachment isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just fear in disguise. On the other side of the spectrum lies obsession, and it doesn't always look like the movies. Obsession can be subtle, slow, creeping thoughts that start small and then refuse to leave. He might find himself checking your social media, wondering who you're spending time with, analyzing your silence like it's a puzzle he needs to solve. His mind gets caught in a loop, playing back old conversations, trying to identify where things shifted. He might create fantasies about you coming back, about what he would say if you did, about how things would be different. And all the while, he's drifting further from reality and deeper into emotional dependence. This kind of obsession doesn't feel like power. It feels like anxiety, like restlessness, like emotional hunger that won't go away. The silence you've left becomes his trigger, and because he can't control it, he becomes consumed by it. He starts to mistake your absence for rejection, and rejection, especially unspoken, is fuel for the obsessive mind. His ego, already wounded, now feeds off the idea that he has to fix something, prove something, or win something back. Obsession becomes his way of holding on to the illusion that he still matters in your world, even if you've stepped away. And then there's the tug of war between these two extremes. Some men don't fully detach, and they don't spiral into obsession either. Instead, they shift between the two. One day they feel strong and stoic, sure they've moved on. The next, they're drowning in old memories, tempted to reach out just to feel something again. This internal conflict is exhausting. It drains their focus, affects their mood, and keeps them emotionally stuck. Because the truth is, neither detachment nor obsession brings clarity. They're both reactions to pain, both attempts to cope with the discomfort of being left in the unknown. What complicates this even further is pride. Pride stops him from reaching out, from admitting he cares, from acknowledging the impact of your silence. So even if obsession is tearing him apart inside, he wears a mask of control. And if detachment is leading him toward emotional numbness, he calls it growth. But beneath those surface-level coping strategies lies a deeper truth. Your silence has forced him into a space where he must face who he becomes when attention is taken away, when connection is paused, and when presence is no longer promised. Neither path is easy. Obsession traps him in the past, while detachment blinds him from his emotional truth. And in trying to regain a sense of balance, he may make choices that push you even further away, or keep him stuck in an internal cycle that he doesn't know how to escape from. The absence of your words has done more than create distance. It's pulled back the curtain on how he truly handles emotional disruption, and the outcome of that revelation is often far more revealing than any conversation you could have had. When a man no longer hears from you, no texts, no calls, no reminders of your presence, something quietly but powerfully begins to shift in his perception. At first, he might interpret your silence as temporary, even trivial. He might assume you'll come back around, or that you're simply in a mood. But as the silence continues and the familiar rhythm between you is broken, a subtle but profound process begins. He starts to reevaluate your worth, not in the way he did when you were actively part of his life, but through the lens of your absence. And that kind of realization tends to hit harder than anything your words could have ever expressed. Absence creates a vacuum, and human nature instinctively fills that vacuum with meaning. When you were present, it was easy for him to take you for granted. Your daily messages, your concern, your consistency, it was just there like background noise he didn't need to pay close attention to. But now, without your presence, he starts to notice all the things that are missing. The way you remembered small details about his day, how you offered comfort without being asked, how you held emotional space for him when no one else did. In that quiet, he starts to trace the outlines of your value, not because you're reminding him of it, but because your absence is doing all the talking. It's not always immediate. At first, he may even feel relief, especially if the relationship had tension. He might enjoy the space, convince himself he needs it. But time has a way of bringing clarity. What felt like freedom begins to feel like emptiness. What seemed like peace becomes unsettling. And then he starts to remember the moments that mattered, the real conversations, the laughs, the way you showed up for him when no one else did. The very things he once overlooked now become vivid in his mind. Not because you're there to present them, but because the silence has made him responsible for reflecting on them alone. This reevaluation is deeply personal because it forces him to confront not just what you were to him, but who he was with you. Maybe you challenged him to be better. Maybe you made him feel seen in a way no one else ever did. Maybe you brought warmth and stability to his chaotic world. And now, without your presence, he begins to realize what role you truly played in his life. Sometimes it's humbling. Sometimes it's painful, because the mind can only distract itself for so long before it starts to dig beneath the surface. And in this digging, he's not just thinking about the good times, he's also confronting how he responded to your love. Did he reciprocate? Did he appreciate it? Or did he mistake your consistency for permanence, assuming you'd always be there no matter how little effort he gave in return? That question lingers heavily, because when someone steps away quietly without drama or chaos, it forces accountability. It creates a mirror. He has to face the reality that maybe you were more valuable than he allowed himself to admit, and now he's left trying to calculate that worth without any more proof to go on. This process isn't always linear. Some days he might feel indifferent, distracted by life. Other days, something small, a memory, a song, a scent triggers a wave of realization. And it's in those quiet, unexpected moments that your worth hits him the hardest. Not in grand gestures, but in the subtle absence of your energy. The silence becomes your presence. It surrounds him. It whispers the things he ignored. It reminds him not just of who you were, but what life feels like without you. And the irony is, the longer you stay silent, the clearer everything becomes. Because in your absence, you're not chasing, you're not explaining, you're not trying to prove anything. That forces him to do all the emotional labor himself. He has to dig, to reflect, to understand. He has to confront the impact you had and the hole that's been left. And if he's emotionally mature enough, this reevaluation can change everything about how he sees you, not just as a partner, but as a person with value that isn't dependent on his recognition. Some men realize too late. Others begin to see things just in time. But one thing is almost always true. When you step away without warning, without explanation, and you do it with quiet strength, it triggers a process in him that no argument or demand ever could. He starts to ask the questions he never considered before, and the more he asks, the more he understands. Not just about you, but about what he truly lost when he lost your presence.